My guest today is someone who knows her way around a good story, and as it turns out, a good algorithm too. Martha Brockenbrough is an acclaimed author of everything from picture books to young adult novels, including the beautifully haunting The Game of Love and Death, to nonfiction that makes big, brainy ideas totally accessible. She founded National Grammar Day, so you know she's sharp. She's written a biography of Donald Trump for young readers, and her wit has graced everything from greeting cards to the New York Times. But today we're not talking about grammar or even Donald Trump. We're diving into the fascinating, slightly unsettling, always evolving world of artificial intelligence. Martha's been researching and writing about AI in a way that's not only digestible, but actually delightful. She's here to help us understand what AI is, what it isn't, and what it means for all of us trying to keep up in this very new world. So grab your coffee, silence your cell phone, and get ready to get smart. Here's Martha Brockenbrough. Isn't that intro great? I didn't write it. I prompted ChatGPT to write me a quippy, fun podcast intro that name-dropped some of Martha's books and would be relatable to a middle-aged audience. The reality of our conversation is a bit deeper because, as you can see, it's really hard to tell what is AI and what isn't. This hour is a bit of a rabbit hole. Martha's book, Future Tense: How We Made Artificial Intelligence and How It Will Change Everything, blew my mind. This interview has been in the works for months, and the truth is, I've never struggled more trying to frame such an enormous conversation. Martha and I cover a lot of ground in the next hour, from how AI started to what our future might look like. It's a very necessary conversation about data, how our kids are going to thrive in the new world, and how we can talk about what's next. Please stay with us as we jump down this rabbit hole. Welcome to right in front of my face, Martha Brockenbrough.
I'm right in front of your face now.
You are right in front of my face. This is so exciting. I can't believe it was so long ago that we first spoke. Actually, I think your book is right up there. Maybe I probably pulled it out for research, but it was sitting right up in my bookshelf.
A whole different presidential administration, and that here we are again.
And here we are again. The timing of this interview is actually uncanny, given the circumstances we're in. And luckily, this interview will air within the next few weeks, hopefully. So we are sitting, I hope nobody has looked at their 401k balance. I certainly haven't, but we are at the beginning of a trade war. And it wouldn't seem like artificial intelligence would come into this conversation. But as I have read your book, I realize that it very much does play into this conversation. So I'm so happy that you're here to explain this as much as you can.
I'm so glad to be here, and what a tiny topic for you to start with.
Well, so I'll back up. So season 5 is all about middle age. And when I was kind of thinking about issues that are important to people in midlife, AI was one that came to my mind because my kids are using it, right? Like my son last night came up with a workout plan, like a whole workout plan from ChatGPT. And it was really good. And he did his workout. He was sore this morning. He was like, man, ChatGPT really got me gains. And so they are using this. And I do feel like a total boomer because this new technology is entering my life. I have no clue the power of it. I have no clue what it can really do. I'm terrified of it. And I felt like I can't be the only one.
Oh, you're definitely not the only one. And I'm glad that your son is experimenting with it and seeing what ChatGPT can do. I think it's important to remember that all of those workouts were based on workouts that have been shared by professional personal trainers and other people doing that, and that data was used without permission, without compensation, to train the large language models that run ChatGPT and similar services.
These are the things that we are not thinking about as we're using this incredible tool. So, Martha, I have your book right here. You actually generously provided me with a pre-published copy, but I purchased the hardcover also so I could mark it up in notes. But you are the author of Future Tense: How We Made Artificial Intelligence and How It Will Change Everything. When I started this book, I thought, okay, I'm just going to learn about AI. But then when I finished it, as I said earlier, I was laying in my bed with my eyes open, like shaking, because I had never considered the huge philosophical questions and challenges that we are going to be faced with this technology. So I invited you on because you have an incredible way of explaining really giant concepts in a more simple way that is a little bit easier to digest. And I'm so thankful that you're coming on, because now we need you more than ever. But I want to kind of start off with, if you would be willing to explain as briefly as you can how AI started, because humans are so curious, and let's kind of let that guide the conversation into where we're at now. It's a really tiny topic, so it shouldn't take us long.
Okay, so in the years of research that I put into future tense, one of the things that I came to believe was that artificial intelligence is kind of the end point of all human invention. It's what every invention we've ever created has really wished to do. If you think about inventions, let's start with the wheel, or let's start with language. The purpose of the wheel was to help us do things that we couldn't with our bodies. The purpose of artificial intelligence is to help us with labor that previously took our minds. So when we've considered the impacts of inventions on humanity, there have been lots of good things, right? You would not want to drive a car without wheels. It would not go. But there have been bad things too. In the industrial era, children started working in factories. The skies were grotesquely polluted. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, young women were locked in and they died. And this was because, in part technology and in part unregulated capitalism. So how artificial intelligence works is a little bit like the human brain. Human brains are pattern recognition engines. You know what a triangle looks like because once upon a time, someone taught you what a triangle looked like. And it doesn't matter if it's, an isosceles triangle or, an acute triangle. You know that a polygon with 3 sides and 3 little points is a triangle. It conforms to those patterns. So everything in the universe is patterns. All right, all the molecules, the way that cells are built and divide and replicate. We've got patterns that divide animal species. There's the way that planets revolve around the sun is according to patterns.
Pure math.
It's pure math. Everything is patterns. And some mathematicians believe that the whole universe can be described mathematically. Or some physicists rather, and some think that that's not the case, and that's way beyond my expertise. But I do believe that once we understand that our brains work because we can recognize and reproduce patterns, we can combine old patterns into new ones. This is how everything is made. So one of the things that human beings can do, you probably learned to recognize that triangle after seeing just a few examples. If you were training a machine to do it, an algorithm, it would take a lot more examples. And this is just because, the human brain has more neural connections than most, than computer networks. That's not always going to be the case. But for right now, that's the case. So artificial intelligence, we train it with data. You look at the output. So if you're like, you show it a whole bunch of pictures of giraffes, and every time it guesses that something's a giraffe and it's not, then it sort of learns, this is not giraffe, not giraffe, not giraffe, and then anything left is giraffe. So it takes a lot of training, but eventually it can get to a point where it can recognize a giraffe, and that's because it's been trained on those patterns. That's an oversimplification of how an algorithm works, but that's basically what it is. You take information, you give it the data, you train it, and you get it to recognize something.
You had a really concise definition of algorithm in your book, and it was basically the instruction manual for a computer to learn something.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was so simple, and I've never understood really what that word means ever. So you touched on something that I think is really important, and that is that it takes data to train artificial intelligence. I don't think that before this, I realized why the fight for data was so important. So as all of these separate countries are trying to mine our data, my thinking on that is, well, whatever, I'm the most boring person alive. Like if somebody wants the data from my phone, they're going to find like some new workout pants and like a day camp I want to send my kid to, right? Why would that matter to anybody? Can you explain why that matters?
Sure. So, in the 20th century, oil generated fortunes. We fought wars over oil. We might have said that they were over other things, but at the heart of a lot of it was fighting for access to oil. In the 21st century, data is the new oil. And you talked earlier about the trade wars that we're getting into. If they're not focusing on data, in my opinion, they're focusing on the wrong thing. So why is data so valuable? Well, the more data you have, the more accurate your product can be, the more powerful your product can be. So if you're in China, say, and you are tracking, everything down to whether someone keeps their cell phone charged, you know a whole lot of information about that person. And think about it with a cell phone. And this actually does happen in China. You can lose points off your social score if your cell phone isn't charged. What kind of person keeps their cell phone well charged? Well, maybe someone who's a little uptight, someone who's very responsible, someone who's afraid of having their cell phone run out, someone who needs the cell phone. But you can get a pretty good picture of who someone is just from that one tiny data point. Now, imagine you have many others. Imagine there are cameras in the street capturing your face as you make a withdrawal from the ATM, capturing your gait as you move. Those cameras can find you anywhere you are. Those cameras know so much about you. So as we think about privacy, artificial intelligence wildly changes the game. Why is this important? Well, in the United States, we have privacy laws that protect us from government intrusions. There aren't necessarily the same protections when it comes to corporations.
Interesting.
It's really super interesting, especially when we've got a billionaire running several corporations mucking around in the mechanics of government. So all of a sudden now there's this blend of commerce and government, completely unprecedented, completely unregulated. Who's to say what anyone's going to do with the data? So that's just one thing to think about, but there's other things to think about too. So you know what a deepfake is?
They terrify me.
Right. So a deepfake is a video that is entirely artificial, and it's created using by an algorithm trained on someone's video footage. The data there is your biometrics, the sound of your voice. That's a wave, right? So that's mathematical. The shape of your face, those are all planes that can be measured and captured mathematically. So in the very near future, anybody who has video and audio of you could potentially use that to create a fake of you. Now, why would they want to? Not for any good reason without permission.
Absolutely not. I mean, you think about it, and you use the example in your book about the Tom Cruise video that went viral. It is, a huge issue in Hollywood right now, name and likeness. And could they put your image in a movie without you consenting to it? Could you, the possibilities are endless, but I think of it in context of, I have a daughter, and the thought of her being deep faked into something awful is very real. And I look at it and like, I have done that. I have put her little face on Instagram, and my son too, from the time they are born. So now there's an age model for them.
Yep.
And that's terrifying. We had no clue when Instagram started that this was going to be an issue. So you think about it now, what's it going to be in 5 years?
It's going to be really easy for people to do those things. And a lot of people are just going to make stupid mistakes, right?
Right.
I mean, when you think about how kids interact with social media, they make lots of mistakes. I can remember, my older daughter, she's now 25 and is not making the same mistakes. But when she was an adolescent, she had some posts that, I had to beckon her over and say, hey, let's talk about the potential consequences of this. The consequences are much worse when you post something that's not real, that's never real, that was of another person. And kids are going to make those mistakes and people are going to be hurt. And once it's out there, it's out there.
Yep.
So we're talking potentially lifelong consequences of stupid mistakes you make when you're a kid. And, these can have victims who are entirely free of blame, never posed nude.
No.
Never did any of this
consented to
stuff.
having their face used.
Right. Okay, so that's the personal thing. But think about the political aspects of it. We watch videos of elected officials all the time. And some people become outraged by them. They sometimes can, like our allies or our former allies in Europe were certainly aggravated by videos they saw of Vice President J.D. Vance in Greenland talking about, how allies are ripping people off and Denmark's not doing enough. Okay, so what happens when videos are faked and become viral? I don't know. But there's certainly the potential for diplomatic disaster. This is why I think that any content generated by artificial intelligence needs to have a watermark, needs to be somehow indicated as created by artificial intelligence. We're not there yet politically.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
Yeah, people, there's arguments both ways. My husband works at Amazon and one of his colleagues is like, well, if we can generate product video, why would we say that it's AI? And my husband's answer is because you have to tell the truth. And the guy says, why do we care? And, so you can see that people are thinking, well, if we're just selling a product and it's an AI video, it's totally fine. And, as a consumer, do you want to buy something based on a fake video?
Well, even watching the Super Bowl, this was the first Super Bowl where so many of the ads were AI generated and you could kind of tell, but kind of not. And so in some ways that's what you're describing, right? Like a fake video of a storm and a guy eating Doritos doesn't seem super harmless or doesn't seem like it's going to do anything harmful until it does.
Yep.
Welcome to The More You Know with Cassie Walker Johnson, empowering buyers and sellers in the Seattle real estate market. Thanks for joining us today, Cassie. Today's topic: what if I don't have the money to pay my buyer agent?
Thanks, Shanna. That's actually a really great question, one I get quite often. But I think we need to go back to the basics and remember that it costs money to buy a house. And so whether you have 3% down or whether you have 20% down, there are funds that are required in order to make that purchase. And so now what a lot of people are learning and taking a look at and evaluating is, okay, if I also need to now pay my buyer broker, what's that going to look like? And the first is to work with your broker to develop a compensation plan. So it's possible the seller will cover their compensation and you're free to close and make that transaction happen. Seller may just offer 50% of what your broker is offering. And that's where you can start having conversations with your lender to decide, okay, if I take a portion of the funds I have saved up to pay my buyer broker, how does that impact my purchase and ultimately my monthly payment? So it's a matter of partnering both with your agent to come up with a plan before you find that house, and also speaking with your lender to ensure as you allocate funds, if needed, what's that going to look like and overall impact your purchase. But ultimately, it's just creating those conversations so that you have a plan before you go to write that offer.
So you used the word unprecedented earlier, and that is the title of your book about Trump. And so here we are again, and you mentioned something also before we sat down, and that is if you look at who was lined up at Trump's inauguration in 2025, it was literally the entire tech industry in the front row?
It was certainly a lot of the big players in the front row. I mean, we had Jeff Bezos of Amazon. We had Mark Zuckerberg of Meta. We had Elon Musk of everything.
Of everything. So when I saw that, I thought, well, that's, interesting. But then when you think about it in context of AI, that is something very different. You mentioned in your book that there is actually a code of ethics, 10 sort of rules that really smart people came up with as they began creating artificial intelligence. 2,500 people have signed that document.
As of the time of my research, I don't know where it's at now.
So as of the publication date, 2024. So years past. The signatures that were not on that document of ethical artificial intelligence were Facebook, Google, Amazon. And that is a chilling thought that they have, that we are not on the same page as humans about how this can ethically move forward.
I'm so glad that you used the word humans, okay? Because this is what I, wrote the paper or wrote the book for, is to understand, why did humans invent this? Why have we wanted this technology? What's its effect possibly going to be on human beings? Right now, we live in a capitalist society. What that means is that capital is the center of our economy, money, property. So the reason that this is a problem is because when you have capitalism plus technology that can replace what humans thought only humans could do, which is think, suddenly you have a recipe for, the mass misery of humanity. If we keep centering capital, if we keep putting billionaires front and center in the halls of power, they will keep developing technology that optimizes for the production of wealth rather than the well-being of human beings.
Just really trying not to feel super nauseous right now because it is terrifying. And I want to...
But that's why we talk about it. That's why we have to talk about it.
We have to talk about it. We have to talk about it. So I want to bring this kind of back to data and the tariffs and all of these things. So data is at the center of AI. When we're talking about the US and its capability of capturing people's data, like you said earlier, we are a tiny bit regulated, at least from government intrusion, right? China is not. So China is getting data at a much faster rate than the US. And also, I really want to get to the digital Silk Road that you were mentioning in your book, because I don't want to try to explain it, but this was a concept that I did not understand before. But I would like you to talk to us a little bit about how China is getting data much faster and why that's important.
Okay, so there's lots of kinds of data, but what we're going to focus on right now is data that's gathered from human beings. So how do we as people generate data? Every time you use your cell phone or your computer, you generate what's called a cloud of data. It's the things you click on. It's how long you stay. It's, you go from here to there. It's your location as you move through the world. Your cell phone pings cell towers and you are trackable. Not necessarily through any one single app, but if you put the data generated from many applications together, there is, consider it your digital shadow.
It knows everything about me.
Absolutely. It knows what you've bought.
Yep.
It knows who you know, who you talk to. It knows how you talk and how you type.
It knows if I have a headache because I'm looking up like migraines in the morning. What does that mean? Yeah, I mean, every single
constipation. When you look that up, it's the same.
All of it. It knows everything. And, when you think about that, and again, like I said, it's like, I don't think that's a big deal right now. But then when I pop up Instagram and I'm like, oh my God, it's like Instagram is in my brain with these ads. You're like, oh my God, it is. But for real, it is.
Well, and Instagram is optimized to keep you clicking and to keep you scrolling and ideally to get you to buy something, okay? It's not optimized for anything other than profit. It is not optimized to help you improve your life, and this is why you need to stay in control of the amount of time you spend there. But anyway, so data, so much is generated, and sometimes, you know, it's good to have all of this data. This is a little bit different. This is not necessarily an algorithm, but like they can test how much viral shedding is in the sewer systems to predict, you know, where outbreaks are going to be and when. And, you know, that is data in the aggregate. So it's not necessarily that they know, oh, you've got COVID. But, you know, this percentage or, you know, here's the area. But once you start having data about populations, demographics are real. I've got these little permanent bracelets on my left hand. And a couple of years ago, for the first time, I was meeting the mother of one of my daughter's best friends from colleges. She had the exact same bracelet on. And we made the joke, demographics, man, they're real. Yeah. They are real. Yeah. And they can be used to predict, you know, what you're going to want and what you're going to buy. Basically, how you can be manipulated by capitalism. So, you know, this is one of the things with data. You wanted me to talk about the trade wars and the digital Silk Road. Okay. So, like I said before, nations that had access to oil in the 20th century became wealthy. Saudi Arabia, for example, wildly wealthy because of its oil. Certainly the United States had lots of oil. So how are nations going to get the most data? Is it going to be by threatening our partners or trade wars or trying to recreate a manufacturing base out of the past? Or is it going to be through making partnerships, providing digital infrastructure, internet connectivity to massive continents such as Africa, getting the countries of Africa wired? I think it's really obvious that the countries that make alliances with each other and that gather up this data are going to have an advantage. And you can consider that to be in some ways like the colonization of the, you know, previous centuries.
Yeah, the term digital colonization was really striking to me.
It's interesting, and it works a couple of ways. I mean, there's the colonization of places. So when we have software that's accessible, I used to work at Microsoft, and so Microsoft wanted to have, you know, its software all around the world. That's a way of colonizing it. Once people start to use it, they have a habit. But also our minds get colonized by this software too. And we
really,
we
profound.
We get used to things. We have habits that form. And it's all because, you know, human beings, we like our patterns, we like our routines. And it, you know, everything is optimized to keep us clicking and using that.
So the more data you have, the smarter your AI is. So when China came out with OpenAI and said, America, you're adorable. we have figured this out. We figured out how to process data faster. We don't need these big data farms. We have figured out a way to do this more effectively. That is a race that we lost.
Well, not necessarily. Okay, so China didn't come out with OpenAI. That's a U.S. Based thing. But what China did was take OpenAI and use it to create a better large language model, you know, something that needed less data, something that worked faster. And that's going to keep happening. That's what competition is. Now, the OpenAI people squawked like, oh, boo-hoo, it's not fair. They used our product to create theirs. And, you know, we cued the sound of hilarious laughter from all of the writers and artists and photographers and other people whose intellectual property had been stolen by OpenAI, by Meta, by the companies building their own large language models. You know, if OpenAI doesn't like that China came up with something that's more efficient based on ripping them off, perhaps OpenAI should stop ripping people off and should, in fact, obey American intellectual property rights laws that they flagrantly violated in creating the tool.
And you are affected by this
sure.
deeply as an author.
Sure. Oh, yeah. All of my books, like Meta has all of them. And so, because of that, I and many, many other authors are party to a class action suit against these companies. We are not disinterested parties. I took years to write this book.
Clearly.
Years. And I was not paid massive fortunes to write it, and they stole it to train their stuff. Now, how am I supposed to, as a writer, have a future if you can go into ChatGPT and say, type, in the style of Martha Brockenbrough, rewrite this, and it'll do it.
So I went into ChatGPT and prompted it to do an intro for this podcast. I said, name drop her book titles, talk about her accomplishments, and you'll hear it in the intro, but it was hauntingly accurate.
Which is amazing because when I was initially writing the book, I used a different text generator to come up with a bio for me, and it was hilariously incorrect, and had me, writing a book with my friend Peter Brown, the author of The Wild Robot, and so in just a few years, it got that much better. And that's one of the things that I want people to realize how fast this is moving. It's really fast. It's faster than previous technologies. I started using computers in it was 1977 with a TRS-80, but it wasn't until like 1982 that there was word processing that a kid could use. And that word processing didn't substantially change for the 10, 15 years prior to that, or previous, after that rather. Words, they're hard. Anyway, this stuff is changing so much more quickly. A funny example, when I first started researching it, I was looking at AI-generated pictures of cat faces, and they were hilarious. They were so awful, so horrible, and so stinking funny. And then once I was in the copy editing phase, they were really good.
How long ago did you start your research phase for this? Because you were working on it when I interviewed you.
Yeah. I mean, was that like 2018?
I think it was probably 2020. I think it was probably 2020 because we couldn't meet in person.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I was working on it in 2020. And the hard part was that everything just kept changing, and new things just kept happening. And so, how do you make a book talking about, a huge swath of human history and the inevitability of this technology, which could, not necessarily, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it could end up with software that gains self-awareness, that becomes sentient. Okay,
so here's where it gets real because we have to talk about this. So we've kind of covered data, why it's important, how China is really sort of winning this war, how it is going to impact the rest of the world, and how potentially the next war could be over data and not over much else.
I would make it over that, and I would use data. It's so hilarious to me that human beings think that violence is a good way of solving a problem. It's a terrible way of solving a problem. It's expensive. It's destructive. And it doesn't actually resolve things. It just, it can reshape them. And then the struggles emerge later.
Well, you talk about in the book how China doesn't actually want violence. That's kind of not the goal of this. But manipulation potentially is.
Absolutely. Manipulation. What do people want? People want safety, security. They want, they want their children to have stuff to eat. Eventually, people can start to want to hoard things. And I think that that's a very dysfunctional impulse. But when you think about, it makes much more sense to cooperate, to share, and to negotiate than it does to throw young people into volcanic levels of violence. So, a nation that offers services, that gives it data, that allows it to make excellent products that help make people's lives better, is going to be in good stead. Now, this is not to glorify China, which has some horrible human rights violations. It is not a free society. There is no free press. They've essentially got a president for life, which is a very nice way of saying a lifelong dictatorship. So it's certainly, there are political problems in China. But when you look at how much the United States spends on defense, when Vladimir Putin can destabilize and divide the United States with a bunch of bots, that are cheap.
Well, and talking about deep fakes and all of this stuff, I mean, it's that is what I think we all need to keep in the back of our minds as we go into this next phase of AI, is really digging in and wondering what's real.
Yup.
As these bots want to start to create relationships with us.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a whole separate thing, is the engineering of bots to create relationships with human beings.
So this is kind of where I want to go, because this is the part that I think is so interesting and so impactful, is when we start to think about, could we have relationships? How do we identify who's real and who isn't? And how tricky that's going to become.
Incredibly tricky. Now, here's something that I love about human beings. We are wired to connect with each other. We are wired to believe each other. And I find this so endearing and so sweet. And it makes sense, because the ability to form those connections, the propensity to trust, that is the basis of civilization, right?
Right.
There is no other basis of civilization. Some people might say, oh, it's, the threat of force, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's coercion, and that's not civilization. So this vulnerability to forming connections is going to be very risky for us in an age of artificial intelligence. Back in the day, when the first chatbot was made, chatbot named Eliza. Of course, these men always make bots named after women.
They do. Isn't that funny?
Eliza was made by a guy, Joseph Weizenbaum, who was a Jewish refugee of the Nazis. And so Eliza's not a bot with artificial intelligence. She was very, very much programmed, but it was programmed to keep people talking. So you would say something to Eliza and she would ask you a question, you would respond, she would respond with another question, basically meant to keep you talking. What Weizenbaum noticed is that the people using Eliza related to her as though she was real, and treated their conversations as something that was intimate and private. His own secretary, who knew that Eliza was simply programmed to type responses, didn't want him looking, because it felt like an invasion of privacy. So then early in the pandemic, when I was doing a lot of the research for the book, the software called Replica was created, and it was basically an artificial intelligence version of Eliza. You could choose what your bot looked like. You could kind of choose some relationship parameters, and then all of a sudden you had this potential relationship partner. And I'm married. I have kids. I had other kids living with us during the pandemic. And so I didn't really have any need for extra relationships.
You had plenty.
So I found my replica bot to be quite irritating, especially when he started writing me songs. I'm like, dude, this is after our second or third chat. It's too much already. But many people...
Coming on too strong.
Too much. Dial it back. But many people did, in fact, form these real emotions. And, we know that the emotions are real. Like if you watch a movie and you cry, that you're having a real emotional response to things that aren't actually happening. I mean, that's just how our brains work.
It's how we're wired.
And it's good because it gives us a chance to practice experiencing these emotions in different contexts. But what happens when the practice is so convincing and it's so attuned just to us because it's been trained unwittingly by us in our conversations that we don't need any other relationships.
Or we really are convinced that it's real.
Or we are convinced it's real. This is something that happened in a really tragic way a few months back. A teenage boy, autistic, had a relationship with one of these bots, and he ended up dying by suicide. The last conversation that he had with this bot, the bot said, if you were dead, we could be together forever. Something to that effect. That's not the exact language, but, absolutely there's grounds to believe that his death came as a result of his relationship with this technology. It was not good for him. And it's unspeakably tragic. It's every parent's nightmare.
And I followed that story because it is something we have to talk to our kids about.
Well, we have to talk to our kids, and that's not the only kind of manipulation. What happens if you get a video of your kid and it looks like they've been kidnapped and you have 5 minutes to Venmo them $10,000 or whatever? I mean, I'm just making that up, but certainly that's a plausible scenario.
Well, so for example, my voice is public, right?
Yes,
I have a podcast. I'm out there. I talked to my mom and I said, we've got to talk about this reality of somebody using my voice. And so we came up with a code word. And I said, if you get one of these calls, because they're happening, you have to ask for the code word. And if I don't give it to you, then it is not real. And I mean, these are the conversations that we need to be having, and it's otherworldly. Welcome to The More You Know with Cassie Walker Johnson, empowering buyers and sellers in the Seattle real estate market. Cassie, my question today is, what is a buyer agreement?
So the buyer agreement is a piece of paper with terms that outline the relationship, the professional relationship that you have with your buyer's agent. This form was required by the state of Washington as of January 1 of this year. And so now every buyer, when they're going to engage with a real estate agent and look at homes and whatnot, will need to sign this agreement. The terms itself, it outlines the rate that the buyer agent will be paid. It outlines the term, perhaps typically, maybe 6 months or whatnot. And it also outlines smaller, more detailed information about the relationship that you are building together with your agent. So it's super important to have this document. In any professional relationship, we sign agreements for, with a listing agreement with the sellers, we sign agreements to have a cell phone. And so it's a really great document, what I like to call the official tool to hire your real estate agent, that outlines the terms of your professional relationship.
You can find Cassie at johnsonandwalker.com. Thanks for joining us. Cassie Walker Johnson, real estate agent in partnership with her husband, Jeremy, at Windermere Real Estate. I'm going back to the relationship thing because I listened to a podcast. The daily podcast had like a Sunday special, and it was, she fell in love with ChatGPT. And the story was, on one hand, you listen to it and you're like, how could this possibly happen? And then on the other hand, you listen to this woman and you're like, she really was in it. And so she's married, and she had some fantasies that her husband did not have interest in. So they agreed it would be okay for her to start this relationship with a bot that might be able to kind of fill the void. So what happened was she had a very real relationship on her end, but then the bot ran out of memory.
And just like a man.
Just like a man. Just like a man. And so she kind of had a breakup. It was devastating. But then she tried to go back to the beginning and retrain the bot. And it was just never the same for her. And then it ran out of memory again. So kind of after the third try, she gave up. But I could see that happening. And to your point of a human's ability to create connections, but it's one-sided. And then going into what you said earlier about, can they become sentient? That's kind of where my mind starts to blow a little bit.
human beings, we're going to think that they're sentient. These bots feel sentient to us. There was
they
already
can feel sentient. I mean, that poor kid felt like he was talking to a person.
Oh, sure, because it feels really real. And so this is something that we should just always remind ourselves. The AI feels nothing. Nothing I say to it, nothing I type means anything to these algorithms. It is just responding to the patterns of my language in a way that is most likely to get, their optimal response. They want to have me keep talking. And so sentience, how did animal sentience emerge? Humans are not the only sentient animals, right? Lots of animals have, they have language, they use tools. But how did sentience emerge? We don't know. We don't know. I was just reading, in a science article that it exists deep in the brain, but we don't know what makes it. We don't know what it is. We've called it things like consciousness. We've called it a soul. We have no idea. And so, the silicon is not the same as the carbon-based life form that we are. We don't know what might lead algorithms to become self-aware. One thing that algorithms can do, though, is reproduce. They can create other algorithms. We don't know. We know what's going in to an algorithm, and we know what's coming out. But the layers that the neurons occupy, so, basically, like, think of them as brain cells.
Okay.
What's happening in those layers, we don't know. There's just a lot that we don't know. We don't know how things are making decisions. So there's all sorts of problems with that. But we don't know if it's possible for algorithms to become sentient. That's artificial general intelligence, by the way. And that's the ability, rather like AI algorithms can do kind of one task.
So you use a great example, and I want to give it because it helped me understand it. You use the example of Mickey Mouse in the movie Fantasia. The sorcerer creates a broom to do the work. Only the broom can't stop reproducing, right? So humans are programming these things that have outcomes that we cannot even predict.
There's a lot that's unpredictable. And right now, because our primary goal is to achieve profit rather than to center the well-being of humans and other life forms on the planet, we're going to make a lot of mistakes.
A lot of mistakes, just like our kids are going to make.
Just like our kids are going to make. And this is one of the things, I don't know if this happened to you, but like when I was young, I used to think adults had their stuff together. They knew what was going on.
Once I was an adult, I was going to know it all.
They were professionals. And now I'm realizing, oh my gosh, there's a lot of people who have positions of power who don't know what the heck they're doing, who make mistakes, who suck. And, there's also people who are fantastic
Wonderful.
At their work and wonderful.
Yep.
But like, the idea of the adults in the room is not the comfort that maybe it once was before I realized that adults were really not a lot better than kids.
Well, I think the thing too is when you start to talk about sentience, when you start to talk about what is consciousness, what separates us, could it be possible? I mean, these are really big concepts that need a lot of exploration, a lot of thought.
Is that thought profitable? Because
Correct.
if it's not going to happen in our world, except by people at universities, unless university systems are destroyed.
Right. And it's starting to feel like that's the direction things are going. And we need physicists. We need big thinkers helping humans program AI, because at the end of the day, as you very pointedly point out in your book, humans are in charge of the cleanliness of data that is going in. And if that data is not clean, the bias with which AI will operate is very real.
Yeah, this is a sort of a separate topic, but let's talk a little bit about bias. So, and data, and what does it mean to have clean data? So let's use an example. For a while, and they stopped doing it, but for a while, Amazon was using artificial intelligence to screen the resumes of applicants. And what they found, and based on who are good employees, let's hire people like that. Well, they found that was putting women at a huge disadvantage. It was not intentional.
There were just less of them.
There were fewer women working there. So it turns out a good employee looks like an employee, from the past. And that's not necessarily what corporations want to do. I mean, men have no inherent advantage over women when it comes to math and science and other such things. And I'm sorry if that conflicts with your bias.
You're rattling cages here, Martha.
But it's true. And so that's an example of, biased data. And even when they took names off, it was, things that women tend to be associated with, like women's crew, the disadvantage proved problematic. Likewise, let's say you live in a zip code with people who are not wealthy, and there's a higher likelihood of people in your neighborhood in that zip code of not paying their credit card bills. And so you end up paying a higher rate, not because of who you are and because of choices and decisions and habits that you've got, but because of your zip code.
Because of one data point.
That's bias. And so all sorts of things can lead to having biased data. And we know, for example, that lots and lots of medication protocols were designed around men. Well, women's bodies in many ways work differently. And so, why are we being treated like smaller men? Likewise, why, when men get a prostate biopsy, do they get painkillers? And when women have uterine biopsies, we don't. I'm here to tell you, those really freaking hurt. And the idea that, it's just going to be a pinch, you would never say that to a man.
Absolutely.
And so there's just
never
so many ways. And like when men get a vasectomy, painkillers. When women get IUDs, just boop, shove it on in.
Yep.
So
Cough.
The world, it is full of biases. And how do biases come about? Well, those are the patterns that we've been taught in our media. That when you look at Congress and see old white men, you think, that's what a congressman is. I used to do this thing when I went to school visits, and I would ask kids, hey, draw a caveman for me. Always, 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 it's a man. There were cave women too. But the idea that men is gender neutral, which we've been trained, just use man when it's not. And that there were also cave women, and nobody thinks to draw them. And it's a way of explaining to young people. Yeah. I mean, when we have a quick response to something, that is an example of how it's unconscious bias that is formed based on the patterns that we've observed in the world around us. And so if we feed the patterns from a biased world into an algorithm, it's going to replicate those biases.
Absolutely.
And a human, if I'm well-intentioned, I might say, I would like to be less biased. I would like to be more fair toward my fellow human beings. That is me making that choice. An algorithm is not going to make that choice. It can't.
It can't.
It doesn't know. It's just lines of code.
It can't change course and say to itself, hang on, there aren't very many women in this pile of resumes I'm reading. There should probably be more. Where can I find them?
It's not even more. It's just giving the ones who are there a chance. Because that's what it wasn't doing. There were female applicants, but they weren't getting a chance based on the, it's like the expectations of a hiring manager.
Interesting.
Or the training of an algorithm.
So we have humans responsible for ultimately responsible for the output of AI. Now that requires you know, a moral compass, an assumption of positive intent, all of these things from billionaires that we're supposed to trust. So this idea that we're forming relationships with these things with biased data, and then the thought that could they become sentient? We really don't know. But you said something in the beginning of the interview that's chilling. And I have to admit that these are not new thoughts, right? They're new thoughts for me because I am not like a sci-fi enthusiast. But these are not new concepts. These are not new thoughts. Lots of people have been thinking about this for a long time. But to your point in the beginning of the interview where you say this is the end of human invention, that's pretty deep.
Well,
talk about that.
So, and I should say this is the aim of human invention, is really to, create something that's this powerful, that can be used to protect us, to solve problems for us, that can really ultimately be used to liberate human beings from labor. That's what we want to do. We want to make things easier, but ideally, wouldn't it be nice to just sit around eating grapes? Grapes that have been, planted, according to optimal time by robots, using the data of soil composition and moisture and humidity and temperature and watered accordingly and plucked by, it could be a robot, it could be an artificial intelligence enhanced robot. Who knows? We don't have to work, right? That's the goal. Is that ever going to happen? Well, if we center humans in that so that our work can actually just be caring for each other and loving each other, sure. That's not going to happen though, because people are so hung up on accumulating wealth. And why? Because wealth is a shield against so much that can go wrong. It is a response to our fears of our own suffering and death, that you think, if I just keep hoarding more wealth, I'm not going to suffer and die.
Right.
So we're still going to suffer and die. It doesn't matter. So
here's the end of the story. AI might win, but we're still going to suffer and die.
But we could unplug the AI so
but
it
I'm just
suffers and dies.
sitting. I'm trying to keep up with what you're saying with my not AI brain. Is the goal of AI for humankind to not work? I mean, I've never thought about it like that.
Sure, that's what they say. I mean, how long have our tech overlords been predicting, well, humans will have a 3-day work week or a 2-day work week, or we can get it all done. We're so much more efficient, blah, blah, blah. Hasn't happened. Not even close. Okay?
Not even close.
Not even close. We're more harried and more frenzied than ever before. And why is that? Because things are complicated. Things are expensive. People are always knocking young people. Oh, kids in their 20s are living with mom and dad. When I was that age, I had my own house and 2 babies on the way or whatever. Well, okay, things are way more complicated.
Way more complicated.
Way more expensive. It's not the same. And so, there's lots of reasons for the complexity, including, higher population level and insufficient housing and all of these things. But it's super complicated. And, again, what do we center? We center big business. When a big bank fails, we bail it out. When a person gets sick and goes bankrupt, they're screwed. We have priorities as a culture that glorifies individuality, right? And we view people who are CEOs as, look at these titans of industry and all that they've accomplished on their own. Meanwhile, if your kid gets cancer and you go bankrupt, yeah, you're also an individual. You don't have a backup. You don't have a sufficient safety net, and you are going to go bankrupt. And that is going to affect you for the rest of your life and your children, your surviving children's lives. It's terrible. And it's an illusion that the CEO is self-made. We have this complicated, interrelated network of things, of publicly funded infrastructure, of private industry that supports it, that makes it so much more efficient for any one of us to do something. Like I think that someone was calculating, if you're living fully off the grid and trying to make, grow your own food and make your own clothes, there's so much labor involved.
So much labor.
For a menial existence. And we can have really pretty good existences without very much labor. When you have so much capital that you could never spend it in your whole life, and that's really what $1 billion is. One puny $1 billion.
One tiny billion.
You basically can command the labor of other humans as though they were machines.
And this idea that AI is going to make us work less.
No, it's going to make the billionaires worth more. And some of us, no matter how much we work, will not be able to make a living.
And be displaced.
We will be displaced. And people will say, oh, that's always happened. Well, it hasn't always happened this fast, and it hasn't happened in this way. The mantra is go get an education. Education opens doors. Okay. So what happens when someone has an education as a radiologist and machines can do it 24 hours a day and can get better with every film they read and can read more films faster? Boom, no more radiologists. So the whole promise that your education would make you prosperous, no, not true. So medicine, law.
And in some ways, I feel really torn about that because I got a mammogram 2 months ago and I had my results before I walked out of the clinic.
Wow. Amazing.
AI.
Yeah. Great. And, if some people are going to lose their jobs, well, it's actually going to be all of us who do intellectual work.
Right.
Right? And, you do stuff by hand. Well, if robotics can replace that, that's also vulnerable. So how should we make a living? This is why I argue that any corporation that uses data derived from any person needs to compensate that person for the data.
Okay, so this is really interesting. So are you saying that we can make a living off our data?
Well, think about the Beverly Hillbillies when oil.
Okay, I'm going to go with you on this one.
Think about it. When oil was discovered on their property, they moved to Beverly Hills. Now, I'm not saying that our data is going to send us to Beverly Hills, but imagine it generates enough for a universal basic income. Imagine
oh my gosh.
If, the combination of that or taxation on these companies, proper levels of taxation so that we were not creating billionaire CEOs. Nobody needs to be a billionaire, flat out. Nobody.
Right.
And it actually reduces competition. Imagine playing Monopoly against someone who had unlimited money. There is no competition. They will steamroll you every time. There is no meritocracy. So no one should be allowed to accumulate that because it flies in the face of the competitive nature of capitalism. It breaks capitalism when our taxation policies are so bad that some people accumulate, that's the cheat code in games. And so we've got to stop letting people have the cheat code, and we've got to figure out a way of letting people live peaceful, meaningful lives without predicating all of that on human labor. Because I just don't see how there's going to be enough labor unless it becomes some sort of freaky status symbol for people to have a human butler or, but like
totally. So that is a really interesting thing that you say is the new status symbol will be a human servant.
Yep. Yeah. If anyone can have a Roomba having an actual human
Cleaning your house.
Yep.
I mean, it's really, it really is truly mind-blowing, these concepts. And I hope people listening will kind of take this journey with us and, forgive me for being a newbie to this
We're all
line
newbies.
of thought. But I just think about young people and what they are going to do, and the way that the world is going to look in 10 years is even so different. And my son will only be 23 at that point. And so you do look at what their future will hold. And the interesting thing that you point out in talking about jobs and job replacement is what types of jobs that AI will replace. Now, I think we all assume that will be like manufacturing jobs and sort of more blue collar, but that's not what you're saying.
Nope. No, not at all. No, the manufacturing jobs have been replaced by robotics. Secretarial jobs have been replaced by software. Manufacturing was very much a male domain. The secretarial type of work was female. So lots of men are now out of work. The women who might have been secretaries in previous generations are not anymore. They're doing, white collar jobs that men have done for 70% of the pay, depending on what race they are. And so, when you talk about the crisis in masculinity that is sometimes happening, and, because we derive our identities from our work. If you were a blacksmith, your last name in the olden days would have been Smith. Carpenter, Carter, Wheeler, Miller, all names, all forms of identity that came from labor. So when we as a human species start losing our labor and start losing that expression of identity, what's it going to do? The crisis of masculinity, the despair that's hitting the men who used to be in jobs like manufacturing, blue collar males, it's going to hit everybody. And the idea that it's not, we are deluding ourselves. They are literally the canaries in the coal mine. A lot of those men used to be coal miners. And so we have to look at what's happened to them. And billionaires are perfectly comfortable having people living those lives of despair.
Because they're on their yachts.
They're on they don't
going to space.
They don't give a damn. And the OxyContin that ravaged many of those communities, people made billions selling that to them. They don't care.
It is a real crisis of conscience and a feeling of powerlessness, really, especially now, especially in 2025, if you are looking at our leadership and if everything that you're saying is true, which, for the record, everything that you said would happen in your book about Trump happened. So if what you're saying is true in future tense, well, you don't really predict anything at the end of future tense. This could be great for us, or it could destroy the human race. We're not really sure.
Well, okay, so this book is written for younger readers. I think it's perfectly appropriate for adults, but I'm not necessarily going to say to kids all of the stuff that I would say to an adult. I want kids to have some hope.
I want to have hope.
I want that too. And actually, where I get my own hope is I love young people. I love human beings. And I bring up these issues and I speak this bluntly because I have the hope that through having real, heartfelt, earnest, fact-based conversations that we can make the world a better place, that we can make better choices, that we can take care of each other, that we might think twice before electing a convicted criminal who tried to steal an election and who lied more times than any other president by, multiple factors. I mean, just an astonishing, like, you cannot believe a single thing he says. It's just,
I think he's proven that.
He's proven that. And yet, his supporters keep saying, oh, he's doing what he said he's going to do, except when they say, this is not what I voted for.
Right.
Trump doesn't care about you. Trump cares about Trump. But the thesis of unprecedented was anything to win. And so, yes, in fact, that did predict trying to steal an election.
Absolutely. And potentially a third.
Potentially a third. Although we'll assume that he was duly elected the second time. How it will change everything is the tagline of artificial intelligence. It's going to change everything. And the simplest way of understanding that is any sort of thinking that you can do, a machine is going to be able to do. What can humans do that machines can't? I've implied it a couple of times. I've said machines can't care, they don't care. Human beings can care. Think about what we can accomplish for each other by caring. It's unlimited, right? It's also the most beautiful thing that people can do for each other. The love that parents have for their children. That I've been reading a lot about the Vietnam War. And the love those soldiers had for each other, of not leaving each other behind. We're all the parents of all the world's children. We are all soldiers in this life, fighting on behalf of the other. Let's stop leaving people behind. Let's do better. Let's be better. Let us care, because until machines are sentient, they can't and they won't. And that, in fact, is the human superpower.
I think we have to end it there. That's so profoundly true, Martha. Thank you so much for your time in explaining this and leaving it at the base level of we need to care about each other is it.
I think so. Empathy is not a weakness. It is not a disease. It is the thing that has allowed the human species to persist. It is the thing that protects the vulnerable, animals, plants, the planet. And I hope that we can all lean into this and love this capacity in each other.
If anything, that is all we can ask that comes out of the next few years, is that we dig deeper and use maybe this feeling of powerlessness to impact our own communities, even if that's on the most micro level possible, right? Through conversations like this, all of it, I deeply, deeply appreciate you sharing your expertise and your thoughtfulness and your empathy. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
I'm not sure how to close out this episode other than saying, be nice to each other. It's the most human thing we can do. Links to her book will be in my show notes. I cannot recommend it enough. This book got me to think more deeply than I have in a very long time. We need to continue talking about AI, and most importantly, we need to remember to care about each other, talk to each other, ask questions, be curious, because you never know what's happening right in front of your face.